Great, good to see everybody having a great conversation. Appreciate you all coming out tonight. So in case just make sure you're in the right place, this is Psych Tech ATX, formerly the intersection of psychology and technology. This seems to be the more standard format, so we're going to kind of move in this direction. Hashtag for tonight and for future events, Psych Tech ATX. And the subject is Behavior Design 101. So hopefully you're all interested in that. If not, go. This is the work of, a lot of this is the work of Dr. B.J. Fogg. He's my mentor and has been for 6+ years now. But this has also been my passion for 25 years, figuring out how do we apply psychological insights into how humans behave and think and feel and make decisions, and how do we apply that through technology to impact and improve the behavior, feelings, and decisions of lots and lots and lots of people to make the world a better place. So last month's talk was sponsored by Fogg Design. Tonight's, I sponsored myself. It's from, so we're Live Neuron Labs. We're a handful. I thought I'd take a moment just to say that we're psychology, where we do behavior design, everything from brain science meets design applied to anything you could possibly design. So we've worked with over a dozen Fortune 500s and have been doing this professionally for 15 years. So that's that. So we started last time talking about psychological design. So it begins the question, let's kind of recap what that's about. So the thing that our human brains are doing all day long is feeling, thinking, and doing. So feeling what we should do, thinking about whether we should do it or not, and what we should do, and then actually taking action or not. So with that in mind, let me jump back a second. I just remembered something that I was kind of annoyed at. Not a single person, if I'm correct, I don't think a single person here donated to the meetup tonight. We had all this and not a single penny was donated. So that's kind of a bummer. So that said, I got like 4 or 5 pennies. Some of you must be really broke. So feel free to come up and take some if you're totally cash strapped. All right.
Excuse me, how does a person donate? You need to make it more prevalent, right?
Good point. Good point. He's onto something. Let me try one more behavior change, one more request, and let's see if you can do this one at least. You bombed on the last 2. Okay, everyone just take a deep breath.
Brutal.
And now, please levitate 5 feet off the floor. Oh, you can do it.
I got 2 feet.
And the 3 others?
Perfect, perfect. So those were 3 examples of behaviors that you couldn't do, and they're really illustrative of the 3 ways in which behavior design fails. And even though those seem extreme, that's really the kind of mistakes we make again and again by not having a methodical way of thinking about behavior design. So we're going to get into thinking about that in a methodical way so you can design to it. So now, jumping back to psychological design, it's the sort of top layer, thinking about how people feel, think, and do. We're constantly going through this loop. What should I do? Which decision should I make? And should I actually act or not? And we discussed last time that these systems are very flawed. Our brain does some amazing things in terms of emotions and deciding and acting, but they're heavily buggy as well. There are lots of heuristics, shortcuts in thinking, actual flaws, and so they disturb the effectiveness of our ability to do any of those things. So even though we have thousands of years of developing our culture around the idea that we are rational beings that can vote rationally and buy rationally and make rational decisions, we in fact are very irrational creatures. And so we need to acknowledge that. But luckily, we're predictably irrational. So behavior or psychological design is designing to the fact that people are predictably irrational. Now, to some degree, all design has already accepted that fact. But the explosion in the last 10 or 20 years in really elaborate, data-driven, fMRI-driven, research has exposed lots of very interesting and unusual and surprising ways in which the brain is methodically irrational. And that's allowing designers to come up and say, hey, let's actually borrow this and see, can we create specific models and methods and processes and design patterns that take advantage of that fact, that take advantage of the fact that we're irrational and get better outcomes. So that's psychological design, feeling, thinking, and doing, which breaks down into emotional design, rational design, and behavior design. So today we're going to be focusing just on behavior design, which is the category which has gotten the most press. It's been the most explosive. This is the area that's around behavioral economics and the Stanford Persuasive Technology or Behavior Design Lab, Dr. B.J. Fogg, Nir Ale. You've got Steve Wendell, just a bunch of people working in this space, but not enough. The purpose of having this meetup is, and what most of us at the lab are working on, is trying to get more expertise in this area. In fact, if you're doing any kind of work at all, you're probably trying to optimize human behavior, either your own or your teams or the people that your product is for. And so the more we can spread the word on this and together actually get better at this field, the better we all will be. So without further ado, behavior design. So a definition, a working definition, is designing to help people do what they already want to do. So we've got decades old, or if not centuries old tradition of getting people to do things they didn't intend to do. Marketing and advertising have been, for better or worse, have been able to do A/B split testing on direct marketing for a long, long time, and they got way ahead of the curve in terms of being able to drive behavior. What we're trying to do now is get much more meticulous about it and get much more democratic about it and deal with those areas of society where we humans want to do better, want to feel better, want to act better, and have trouble doing it because we don't fully understand the way our brains work yet. So that's what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to tear through, I do multi-day long presentations at large companies. So what I'm trying to do is give you enough here to be actionable and to see what the space is like. So certain sections like this, I'm going to go through really fast now. And let me also preface that the whole point of psychological design is that the brain is enormously complex. It's the most complex system we know of in the known universe. And even worse, we're very social. And so the social connections between our brains are even more complex than that. So we're talking about a very, very, very complex system. So it's amazing that we are able to draw any conclusions or find any systems at all. When you go study psychology closely or study what the researchers are doing, they're working on and AI research as well, very, very elaborate models about what's going on in the brain. In order to design to it, that's not useful to us. We need to try to find simplified models that are accurate enough that allow, and processes that allow us as designers, as individual people, to be actionable, to actually impact our products. So that's a big thing that B.J. Fogg, being an experimental psychologist, is also has had this great. It's with him being right in Silicon Valley all this time has had a huge impact on the way he presents his work, because it has made him want to bring it to an actionable place. And that's what that's a lot to do with the way that he's presented his stuff and the way that I'll be presenting tonight. So just a huge dash to the evolution of learning. So when you talk about the very smallest particles, you basically have some system that has bad stuff it's trying to get away from and good stuff it's trying to get towards, opportunities and threats. So at the very beginning, you've got just very, very simple creatures that operate completely on reflex. In fact, you've got molecules that aren't even alive that if light shines on them, they cringe up, or if they get too acidy or too warm or too cold, they'll show a reflex. And so the very simplest creatures have this reflex action that can push them into and away from the right environments. So you start with reflex, then you get to behaviorism, which is experiencing something and having a positive or negative effect on the system, and remembering that for later. So it knows that, oh, this type of situation before made me feel really bad. You know, it hurt, or it felt really great. I got a lot of food out of this, so I'm going to pursue more of that. So then you got behaviorism. The next level of learning is behaviorism, but at a social level. We're able to, and a lot of mammals are able to observe somebody else go through the pain and pleasure experience and learn it yourself as if it happened to you, very close to. And what's really cool about this is that by fMRI is if you don't know, is the brain scanning that allows us to watch the brain while it's actually working. So it's exposed that to some degree, evolutionists piggybacked every new level of learning on top of the machinery below it. So when you visualize somebody else, or when you see somebody else experiencing a pain or pleasure situation, our mirror neurons are experiencing it almost as if it's happening to ourselves. In some ways, very similar to it. That's called compassion. And when you emote with somebody like that, but you end up learning, hey, they did this, it felt painful, I should avoid that as well, but in an emotional way, right? Then you get another level above that. You've got imagination, which you can picture the future. And so you're not physically having this pain or pleasure environment. You're imagining a future place when that might happen, and then you're feeling that pain or pleasure predictively based on your past experience. So that's future anticipation of pain and pleasure. Then there's narrative, and this is something that's been really interesting. This could be a whole lecture on its own. That story, we are very wired as humans to respond to story. So when someone tells you a story, your brain is actually, and if you're actually paying attention, your brain is actually simulating the experience. You know, so something kind of magical when we watch TV or movies or read a book or a good storyteller telling us something. It's because our brains are simulating that experience so much so that we're learning from their previous experience. So it's one of the ways in which humans have this incredible learning ability from our social experience. We can learn from others, not just logically, but if someone describes an attack by a bear, I actually feel that to some degree, and now I'm actually afraid of that kind of situation in the future, which is pretty powerful. And then finally, we have the cognitive ability, which is the conscious ability to sit and think, logically think things out, like, well, if I do that, put this much in my 401k, then probably I'll be able to retire, and blah, blah, blah. That's the highest and most recent level. So that's evolution of learning, which parallels the evolution of the brain itself. Starting with bundles of neurons that just have these reflexes. This is then stepping up to the first kind of brain type thing is the reptilian brain, the basal ganglia, which we still have that structure in ourselves, and almost all animals do. This is a very simplistic part of the brain, which but is also very powerful. It's the oldest one, and it's responsible for what is sometimes called the 4 F's, which is fighting, fleeing, feeding, and getting frisky, or whatever else you want to use for F. Then you get into reflex habits, and so those are reflex habits, things that are just automatic, like you see an opportunity to feed, and a certain level of yourself and animals just responds to must eat, right? That's when you're fighting off the snack attack of cake or pie at midnight. That's that part of the brain operating. So then you get the limbic system. So we're going from the middle of the brain out. So this was this reptilian side. Now we get into this limbic system, which is most other animals. This is where you get behaviorism, emotions, imagination, dreaming, playing. So a lot of the other kinds of learning started to evolve within the limbic system, but it's still a very emotional kind of place. It's where narrative lives. It's where social lives, like watching other people and learning from them. And then we get to the neocortex. So look how small this is. This is the part that makes us human, or especially human. It's huge. It's where the rational brain lives. And it's where we have cognition, where we are conscious, where we think about things. And note that it's the biggest part of the brain. The brain in general takes up like 2% of the body's mass, but 20% of the body's calorie consumption. And a lot of that is this whole area, which we use to do what humans do. And we are so committed to this as humans in evolution that, so you know how you see pictures of Neanderthals or cavemen, they have this sloped forehead. Homo sapiens took the extra effort to grow this whole section out even further, making a commitment to this whole area, so much so that we're one of the few, if only, animals that can't birth young that can take care of themselves. So every other animal, the young can usually kind of walk, they can kind of figure things out, they can usually roughly feed themselves. Ours are useless, as we all know, and depend on us to survive for many months before they can start to do anything. And that's because the cranial cavity had to get so big to accommodate all of this that it had to happen after birth. So that was a big commitment, and a lot of that had to do with adding this ability to be logical, and in particular to handle social interactions, which are very, very complex. So that's the rational mind, the cognitive mind. So that breaks us down to then again, just real quick, reflex and habit is here in the basal ganglia, behaviorism, imagination, narrative, social, the limbic system, and rationality is this huge section out here. Now guess which drives the train most of the time? The stuff in the middle. The stuff out here is hugely resource intensive, and if we're in a cool, calm state, it gets to make choices. If you're hungry, tired, mad, thirsty, upset, any of the drunk, you name it, this guy in here starts taking serious control of what you're doing. Okay, so that brings us to the Fogg Behavior Model then. This is the most famous, this is Dr. Fogg's most famous model and probably the most famous behavior model in general. And it's very actionable. It takes what we just talked about and brings it into something that you can think about within your own design experience. But to start to kind of like cement this a little bit, any thoughts? Can anybody give any examples where they have wrestled with this part and this part not agreeing and the emotions taking over?
Romantic relationships, love emotions versus irrational mind telling you to hell out sometimes.
That's a good one and a hilarious one. Room for lots of comedy there. Yeah. Any others?
Stakeholder meetings.
Say that?
Stakeholder meetings.
Stakeholder meetings. Yeah.
When was the last time you didn't get like at a stakeholder meeting at some point?
Yeah. Right. In fact, in general, humans trying to agree on stuff, we play all these, we dance around all these things because we can't just be completely logical in our explanation to people, because you have to wait for dad to be in the right mood, right? All those kind of games. Any other example?
Go into the grocery store hungry.
Oh, yes.
Try making a rational decision standing in front of the donut counter after a long day.
Exactly. Especially after you're exhausted, going through the whole thing, then they lay out all the candy for you right at the checkout lane. Yeah, they do it on purpose, obviously. So Fogg Behavior Model. So let's bridge the gap between this feel, think, and do that we're time. There's actually another step if we start to blow this model out a little bit before, is we have to perceive, and obviously perception itself has lots of failure cases, right? So we're going to perceive the environment. We're going to get some feeling about there's a threat or an opportunity there. I should do something about that. There's some thinking involved about what should I do, how should I react, and then you do it, right? Or you may not do it, depending. So another way to look at it in the Fogg model is there's a trigger, there's something in your environment that suggests an opportunity or danger. Then you get some feeling about it, some motivation to pursue something or avoid something. Finally, you think about it. Obviously, this is all much more complex than just this, but this is a useful simplification. You think about it and you're assessing how hard is it going to be to do? Is it something that's easy or hard? What is it worth doing? And then finally, and what should I do about it, in fact? And then ultimately, do I do that behavior or not? So this comes down to trigger, motivation, ability, and behavior. This is the language of the Fogg model. If you rearrange it, you get trigger, ability, motivation, behavior, but this is the way it's more commonly demonstrated. Behavior equals motivation, ability, and trigger all happening at the same time. So this is very, very good news. This is pretty much right, even though it's a great simplification. As a designer, if you're trying to get someone to do something and they're not doing it, you can look at these 3 things or these 4 things and figure out which of them is not happening. Because as long as each of these is above threshold, the behavior will happen. So you have the ability to design to that and look at it systematically. So let's see how we can do that. Any questions at this point?
So this is all based on the premises that we are rational, right?
This is
You
now,
could actually override the MAT part with irrational ability if you were happy and hungry and not hungry.
this actually takes, this is both irrational and irrational. And the reason that happens is motivation is blended together as both the rational and the irrational part. So I'll break out why in both cases. But if it were just rational, then this gets at why the irrational over controls behavior very often. But the next talk on gamification, we'll talk about more about how to manipulate motivation as well. So this is for either rational or irrational. The difference would be motivation. It includes both, and we'll break that down. Actually, we'll break that down in a minute, and you'll see where the rational and irrational side of that is. In general, if you have questions, shoot your hands up at any time so that we can answer them. And I might say it's coming up next, so don't feel offended if that's the case, but shoot.
Just a comment on the sort of paralleling of rational behavior and morality. From what you said earlier, you spoke of the as-if reaction, and the as-if reaction is emotive, it's not rational. And, Hal is, that goes on and on, just a point.
Yeah, it does. A lot of discussions around morality hinge on assuming people are rational and have chosen. So the penal system, for example, assumes that if we change the penalties for doing something, that it'll change the person's behavior. But someone's about to, murder someone in a rage, they're not going to be thinking, oh, they just added 50 years to the penalty for this crime. It's not going to affect people,
But
right?
people murder each other murder is not necessarily irrational. And the as-if reaction that you spoke of is something that happens when you see an animal get hurt. It doesn't come from your rational mind, it comes from your irrational mind.
That's right, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's both. You have to look at it at both levels, both the cognitive motivation and or the behavioral motivation. Which of the two is in control and what? We'll break that down a bit. Okay, so let's do an experiment. Yes, question.
You just used the word manipulation a little while ago. What can manipulation happen at any of those 3 points?
For sure, yeah. In fact, as designers, we are manipulating, but ideally we're in line with what our users are trying to achieve. That's not always the case, but we're going to break down motivation, ability, and trigger and behavior in more detail, and you'll see how we can design for them. And I would say, design in general is kind of a form of manipulation, but hopefully in line with what our users are after. Okay, so your phone is ringing, and it's ringing, and it's ringing, and you, actually, let's not just say it's ringing. Let's say someone's trying to call you, and they're calling you, they call you 2-3 times, you don't answer. What are some reasons that you wouldn't answer?
You don't like who's calling.
Yeah, you don't like who's calling?
You don't hear it.
You don't hear it, yeah.
You're busy.
You're busy, definitely. Any others?
Phone died.
Phone died. Okay, yeah. So those are all examples of falling within the spectrum. The motivation, I don't care to talk to that person. It's someone I don't like. My ability, I'm in the bathtub, the phone's across the room, the phone's dead. Or trigger, I can't hear the phone because it's too far away, or the battery's dead, or it's on silent, or the ringer's not loud enough, so there's no actual call to action happening that lets me know. So basic design around, so as an example then of the three different pieces of B equals MAT. Now, the extreme examples I gave in the beginning were nobody donated because I never asked any of you to. It doesn't say it very big on the website. I don't expect you actually to do it. So there's basically no call to action, no trigger to do that because it wasn't really expected. Then putting a couple pennies on the table, like it'd be super easy for any of you to come up and get it, but your motivation to do that is absolutely zero. So something can be super easy to do and have no motivation to do it, right?
Put up some bills.
If I increase the motivation, with larger numbers, then at some point it would cross people's thresholds and they would come forward. And then the final one asks you to levitate. So you can be very clear what you're asking people to do, and people could really want to do it because we'd all love to be able to levitate, right? And you still can't do it. So ability is completely off the hook. You can't control it. It's too far. So all three of those are the three variables that we can play with now. So let's take a look at each one individually. Actually, first, this is the famous Fogg model graph where we have motivation across the left side. So it says low motivation. I don't need another penny. To high motivation, wow, I'd be sure would be cool to be able to fly and levitate or grab a $1,000 stack of cash off the front of the table. So you're looking at this space here, and you're looking at the ability to actually do the action. So low is, it doesn't matter how hard it is, I can't levitate. To, hey, it's something I could do, like a tricky yoga pose, but it's going to be pretty challenging, all the way up to, it's super easy to do, like just grab some coins off the ground or off the table, right? So any behavior we're asking people to do is going to fall somewhere in this space. And then ideally there's a trigger, which is the call to action, which is to say, do this. And it could be something that's in your, naturally occurring in your environment, like, a car squealing around the corner and you jump back to not get hit, or the phone ringing, or it could be something we're specifically designing to, like an email that we're trying to get people to open, or a funnel on a website, or an app that's trying to get people to exercise that chimes and the notification says, okay, time to do your workout. So as we are down in this corner where ability is low and motivation is low, no matter how many times you trigger, what's going to happen? Nothing, right? Do anybody have examples in their real life where somebody keeps triggering them, something keeps triggering them, and you're down in this space where the ability is really low or the motivation is really low, or both?
Yeah, I have one app that keeps offering me to do these, a freelancer job that requires certification I don't have. Yeah. And every day I'm like pushing away these notifications that there's, I could go fix a printer in Round Rock. Yeah, it's a good example. It's your motivation is low and your ability to do it. It's like very difficult what they're asking you to do. So, and then all of us have plenty of notifications that are coming in constantly around things that we may have cared about at one point and don't anymore. Spam is an obvious example of something that may be somewhat easy to do, but the motivation is like almost negative. So what that results in, depending upon where we are in the space, it ends up with a curve. Anything triggered below here is not going to happen, period. Anything above here is going to happen. They're going to, if it's a high enough motivation and a high enough ability, and you trigger it, then they will take action. Now, this is, for all the big talk about big data that I have with several folks out there, this line is a conceptual line, not a real data line. But theoretically, there is a point at which you can push the ability or the motivation or trigger better to make sure that someone actually takes the desired behavior. That's the basic goal of what you're doing when you're trying to design for a behavior. So note that this line never comes all the way down here or here. So there are things like levitation that no matter how much you want to do it, the ability to do it is so low it's impossible. Or there's things down here that are super easy to do, like grab the pennies, but nobody really wants to do it. And then to be clear, the trigger has to be clear, present, obvious. So let's break each of those down then specifically so we can get more organized around it.
How do you account for motivation? Some people can be motivated by the greater good, and other people can be motivated by their own standing in comparison to others. So those are two very different behavioral reasons to do something and take action. How do you account for that? Because it seems really simplistic.
It is, and acknowledge it is deliberately simplistic, so we can design to it. And bringing up motivation is also the first thing. If you think about most attempts to stop people from drunk driving, or to start eating better, or to floss, what do they usually try to do? If you see a PS, public service announcement, what strategy do they usually use?
Fear.
It'll cost you.
Fear, something to do with motivation, right? At commercials too, we'll often paint a rosy picture about like if you drink Coke or invest with their company, whatever. They're almost always the default. If we're talking to our children, trying to convince them to study harder, what do? We go into motivation, right? The sort of conventional wisdom is go straight to motivation. And you're right, motivation is very, very complex. One of the biggest messages from the Fogg model is that motivation is the least effective place to go, because most of the useful changes we're trying to help people do, they're already highly motivated to do. If they're purchasing your product, they probably really want to get the outcome that your product promises. Also, most of the societal issues we're trying to deal with, whether it's weight loss or saving more money or being happier or being more educated, like people really want these outcomes. And we know, so when GlaxoSmithKline has told me that they have this issue where even medications that people will die if they don't take them, that they spent billions of dollars developing, they still have trouble getting people to actually take on the schedule they're supposed to take them. So motivation can be sky high, and we see that all the time, even in our own lives, if we don't take action. So yes, motivation is very complex, and that itself is a whole conversation. I'm going to break it down a little bit, but the best thing to do is actually skip it completely in the first place. And because probably what you're designing for, the motivation is already significantly high, and you can go into other issues that are causing it the behavior not to happen are from the other areas. Does that help a little bit?
It does. I guess I'm an organizational psychologist, and what I do is largely every day work with how people are motivated. And if someone is not motivated to use your app, to use your software, depending on which direction they go, there are only two directions, either the greater good or their own personal standing. And depending on where they sit on that continuum will determine how much action they take, on the part of whatever whether it's the group or the individual.
Right.
So I'm having a hard time understanding how you would take that into consideration if you want you'd have to know specifically which direction people are motivated in order to design for them.
Not necessarily. Ability and trigger and behavior are all independent of motivation. The motivation has to be significantly high enough. So everything, all the complexity you're talking about, and in fact, I'd say it's even 10 times more complex than just that spectrum. We'll break it down, in fact, more. But most of the time, the biggest issues that most people in the room are facing, and probably a lot of people you're dealing with too, they are somewhere on that spectrum enough that they want to do something. And even if it's just a little bit, the issue is that they're somewhat motivated and then they crash straight into ability and trigger or unclarity around the behavior. And these are the low-hanging fruit to fix, even if motivation is fairly low. So it's better to go to those other things first to try to fix them, because they're almost always easy fixes relative to trying to change motivation. And we're in fact pretty good at, we're always banging on motivation. Everybody's already doing a lot of motivational things. There are a lot of questions here.
Yeah, actually, I want to make a point to your statement. You know, I've been working on changing organizations to do more effective software development work for years, right? So this is kind of my personal entertainment, you know, during work.
Yeah, this all applies.
We've tried a lot of things in terms of offering bonuses for certain behaviors, right? And the moment we focus on actually making things easier for them to do, we got humongous shift change and you know, way more impact, so that, you know, motivation in terms of money, promotion, standing with social peers, as you put out, we're not as effective as just making things really simple.
Yeah, exactly right. It's not that you don't mess with motivation, and there's not that there's a lot that you can do there, but we often are already banging on that, you know, lever as hard as we can. And it's these other areas are the lower hanging fruit. Other questions? I saw like a bunch of hands up. Yeah.
A comment on motivation. What might be useful to recognize is that abilities and triggers are much more universal than motivations, because
that's true too, yeah.
Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of motivation can come into very relevant play here, is because you might have a certain segment here that's motivated to survive and to eat and to reproduce, and other people have it made already, and their main motivations are emotional satisfaction and personal growth. And those are different categories of people that won't be motivated by the same things.
That's actually a really good point. And it also goes to your point that there's a spectrum and people are motivated by different things. So you might not try to manipulate motivation. You may actually disincentivize some people and increase some other people. So focusing on ability and trigger, you'll actually get both of them successful. Another reason is that a lot of times, like, you might make a motivational video or give a talk or something and get people all excited, but motivation wanes over time, right? But if you build systemic ability and triggers in place, they're going to work again and again and again. So, anything else before you go on? Yeah.
Does narrative, you talked about narrative, does that follow motivation? Because when marketing happens, people tell stories, trying to get people to empathize and feel something that's a trigger, it's also motivation, right?
Narrative is actually the whole story. Narrative is a description of that same flow of perception, motivation, perception, feeling, thinking, and doing. That loop, you're basically giving a description, and probably a very long, blown out one. But I saw this, I felt this way, I did this, I survived, and came back with a bunch of new berries that I never saw before. And so by describing it in that way emotionally, you're basically telling the story as if the person's going through it. So it affects all four of those. So the narrative can be, as we see in marketing, it can be, the narrative can and should be very clear on what it's asking you to do, why you're doing it, how it was done, and you know, what circumstance that behavior is likely to be successful. Okay, so tearing this down a little bit more now. So one thing to note, a big part of this, let's see how we get time-wise. I'm going to skip this part actually and go to so starting out, the very first thing is we've got this person we're designing for, and let's be very, let me make sure we're being broad enough about what I mean by designing for. So how many of you are actually building products where you're trying to get the end user to do something? Okay. How many of you serve in a position where you have a team or a group of people or employees or people outside that you're trying to motivate them to do something? You don't make a product, but you're communicating with them. Right? So your products might be emails, they might be talks, they may be collateral material like that. How many of you are interested in improving how you personally exercise or eat or meditate or focus on gratitude or save more money? Okay, so all those categories, this all applies. They're all the same brain mechanics which have been serving us in amazing ways for a million years, but also have been failing and for a very long time, and we're now finally able to understand well enough to design to. So the first thing you're doing is whoever you're thinking about, whether it's you or your end user, you want them to do a behavior. So a lot of times even for ourselves, it's surprising how inaccurate or how unclear we are about the behavior we're asking someone to do. So being very specific about a behavior is super helpful in getting that action to be taken. So for example, if your doctor tells you to exercise more, or you say, I'm making a commitment to myself to exercise more, what does that actually mean? Are you talking about cardio? Are you talking about strength? Are you talking about running, walking, golf? Like, it's very vague, right? So if you were to create an app, when there are plenty of them that say, exercise today, that leaves the person blank, not necessarily knowing what they're supposed to do, right? And more specifically, if you think about apps and websites and emails, a lot of times they give very vague requests, very vague calls to action, or multiple calls to action that are ambiguous, right? So being very clear, the data is very clear on many emails and A/B tests on conversion funnels. Asking for one thing and being very clear about it is much more successful than being vague about something. So first, let's be very clear about the behavior itself. So after that, that's the behavior part. Of these three, we already dismissed motivation as being the last place to look. Of these two, what do you think is the next place to look in importance? What's your guess? Trigger or ability? Which is the lowest hanging fruit? Trigger. BJ says that it's trigger. So this is your perception. This is something in your environment that says to do the thing. This is a call to action. So it's surprising how often people expect you to do something without providing a clear trigger. So it's not just that the behavior you're asking for is clear, but that you ask for it in a clear, unambiguous way at a time they can actually do something about it. So if you send somebody a card that says to RSVP for a party 4 months ahead of time, they're probably going to set it on a shelf and not think about it again. And when it comes around the time when it would be smart to RSVP, it's completely out of their head, right? If I triggered you only, if I'd only emailed you all to come out to a night a month ago, and there was no automatic follows up from Meetup, then the odds of you coming out tonight would have gone way down. So being reminded the day of that Meetup does automatically goes a long way towards. So a lot of products also will say to a lot of wearables and behavior change apps will say, don't forget to exercise today, but it'll come up, say, in the middle of a meeting at work, or come up at a time when you can't do something about it. So being very clear and actually asking for one thing is super huge, so triggers. Clear, timely calls to action is what a trigger is. Then you get down to the feeling, the motivation. I said this part, this is just time-wise, what's going to happen. You perceive something, you feel whether you should do it or not. This is, we tend to put this last in terms of importance because it's often overhandled. So the last is thinking about it, deciding, okay, I want to do it, I know what to do. Is it going to be a pain? Is it worth doing or not? Is it difficult to do or not? Not is it worth it in terms of motivation, but is the cost I'm going to have to pay to do it worth it to get the result to deal with this motivation? That is a very fruitful space for making, as you said, Mattia, it's a very fruitful place designed to improve follow-through on behavior. So B equals MAT, so this is the order, right? First, be clear on what behavior you're asking for, be very crisp about it, as BJ would say. Trigger it, ask for the sale, as salespeople would say it, have a clear call to action, as you would say on a website. And then simplify the ability. Okay, we're going to break all this down. And then motivation is, yes, something you can absolutely manipulate a lot. I've studied that from everywhere from marketing to CIA techniques to what magicians do, and I love to talk on that as well, but that won't be tonight. So that's B equals MAT. Before we break down each individual piece, it's actually usually not one behavior we're talking about. We're usually talking about a chain of behaviors, right? So let's say I want to go walking every morning. What are the other steps that I need to do to actually get to this?
I'll have to wake up earlier.
Wake up earlier, potentially. What else would I do?
Running shoes on.
Running shoes on. Would I go in my pajamas or change clothes? Right? Depends on where you live, exactly, yeah. Austin. You would have to choose where you're going to walk, right? You would have to actually go out the door and follow the path, maybe strap on your measuring device, whatever it is, call your running buddy. There's a bunch of steps that are between here and actually doing the activity. So that's another common mistake, is to think there's one thing I'm asking people to do. The reality is that there's a series, and we can, if we acknowledge that, be explicit about it, and design to each one of these, you're going to be much more successful. That's called behavior chaining, and we need to use that B equals MAT process at each step in the chain. So start with where your user actually is at. So this is where you start to get into good UX practices, where you get out of your own head, out of your own worldview, and try to understand where the person you're designing for is actually living right now. Not where you think they are, or where they really are right now. So you can then make the step from here, make the steps necessary from here to here. You can only do that by being humble enough to say, I know I'm wrong about my users. There's going to be surprising things I'm going to find out. I'm going to go talk to them, make it very cheap. Just get out to, start talking to people at Starbucks and see what you find out. Now, luckily, you don't always have to go all the way to the end. There's usually a threshold behavior. If you can identify that if you get people to this threshold behavior, they're likely to do all the rest of them. So for example, parachuting. If you have a parachute strapped down and you push them out of the plane, they're going to pull the ripcord. They're going to go all the way down and land, right? They're not going to be able to back up at that point. If you get people outside with their shoes on, probably going to walk a little while at least. If you get people with floss in their teeth, they're probably going to finish flossing. So luckily, you only need to design up to this point. Just bringing back up the brain has 100 trillion connections in it. It's a massively complex thing. We need to have a lot of humility. That means that you need to think about your users, have a lot of compassion for them, and then make a hypothesis based on everything you studied or that you can get your hands on about how the brain works and how you think your design should work, and then know that it's wrong, right? Make your best, and all designers have been fighting this, to emphasize this message, and behavior designers and psychological designers are trying to put lots of red lines underneath that. Like, your initial design is going to be wrong, and you need to get out in front of real people as quickly as possible and test as frequently as possible at a very, very high velocity. And in fact, so two things on that. One, at Leapfrog Toys, where I founded the design group, that's one of the reasons we went from a startup to the third largest toy company in America in just a couple of years, was because I ran 2 separate testing labs with a two-way glass, the cameras, the works, and I had one employee who was bringing children in all day long, all week long. And so the moment you had an idea, you could get paper in front of them with a drawing and talk them through the game you were thinking of doing the day you invented it, and find out whether there's any there at all, and then go back and adjust it and go back and be in front of another kid the next day, and keep doing this for the months it took to complete the product and then ship it to China for Christmas. So being what BJ Fogg calls doing crummy trials. So finding the cheapest way to just test the basic premises of whatever it is you're thinking about doing as early and as often, and build a machine in your organization of getting in front of people and testing, figuring out how do you break that down. Now, yes, you do need to get more rigorous as you go further on, figure out how to get a lot of good data, and make really wise decisions. But up front, just talking to a handful of people will reveal some really stupid, initial ideas you had, and prevent you from wasting any time. You should be going to them with really crappy prototypes to find out what's there and learning from it. Alternately, looking at other people's products that are similar. Yeah.
How do you scale that concept to like organizational change? Because I kind of deal with people the same way, and you can't go to a person and say, so we're thinking of doing this change in the organization. They're not able to predict their reaction because they won't know until they're there. So how do you do like rapid prototyping with that kind of?
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff there and I have a lot of respect for people who specialize just in user testing and usability testing. There's a lot of complexity to it, and also in academia, obviously, the rigor that testing is done is taken to a very high level as well. And I don't want to say that I can speak to all of that. What I do want to say though is that I have been in many, you want to simulate the actual experience as often as possible rather than ask people how they will respond. So sometimes you can send out an email, for example, that's announcing the new change and then call them immediately afterwards and say, how did you respond to that, right? Or very often you roll out to a small group, a crummy trial version of it, and try to have one division within the whole large organization actually do this new program and see how they respond to it. There's just all kinds of, but I also think that we as a design community and as humans in general are rapidly backfilling our techniques for doing this. We don't have all the answers yet, but we should, and in fact, it goes even further. Just recently we had one of the data scientists from Stanford, from Facebook. They have their big data division that does really friggin' awesome stuff. And one of our former lab members is on their team now. And one of my biggest takeaways from his talk was that even when they test, and they can test like an A/B split with 1 million people on either side and find out answers a couple hours later, when they go back and test the same thing a year later, to some percentage of the time, the answer is different. Because we as a society are becoming, we're evolving with our technology. Our expectations are evolving. You know, we can get away with flat design right now, which we couldn't do 10 years ago because the level of sophistication and understanding about interface design by the general populace has improved a lot. So we don't need nearly as much affordances about how things work. So that argues for kind of this future where it's built into your system that you're constantly testing, that you're constantly asking for feedback, where as I'm going around, I'm saying, please email me how did I screw up tonight, and you know, being prepared to take those gut blows because I know that it's not perfect, right? And that's sort of all of us absorbing that humbleness, all of us being able to respectfully continue to give feedback on all the things that we're doing will allow for that kind of improvement, right? Because a lot of times you've rolled out the whole thing, and we know in organizations there's like layers of BS where everybody's pretending that it's working when it's really not. Communication is broken down. So part of it is about us as humans being able to be more allowing that we are irrational, things we make are imperfect, and we are looking for and welcoming input to fix it. Speaking of, so this is basic like design at this point. It's like rapidly, you know, testing something, iterating, the whole lean startup thing. This is basic, but I'm saying pour gas on this. Constantly be thinking about how do I do it faster? How do I make this a machine that's constantly testing my theory on what works? And you do that at each step along the chain then. So talking practical process now, start with very clearly what you want people to be doing. Whether it's what are your business objectives, what is it you're claiming to get them to do with your product, and then make all the steps from, like, learn where they really are, and then list all the steps in between. Now, it may be a chain, to be honest. We've also explored in the lab for quite some time that it can be more of a spider web as well. There could be different kinds of users. Obviously, there's different kinds of users, but there may be different paths to the same thing. Now, you need to keep it in control and kind of focus on where do I think the 70% of my people or the majority of my users are going to be going through. What's this chain that I'm going to try to optimize first? And then with each step, you go with the B equals MAT formula. And first you say, did we make it really clear what to do there? Or did we leave it vague and ambiguous? And then if that's working, and basically run this and observe, like, are people getting through this step or not?
So now we triggered it clearly. We told them exactly what to do. They're still not doing it. Okay, how can we improve the ability? And then if we can't do that, then we might look at motivation, whether we're building the right thing in the first place or whether we can address motivation. So that's the process that you do over and over again, meticulously. We are at 8:30. I was going to break down trigger and ability. I think I really should do these. I'll do these quickly, and then we'll cut to in maybe about 10 minutes, and then we'll cut to conversation. And does that sound good? Okay, so it's going to be fast. If you want more, talk to me later. Okay, so triggers. Triggers are your call to action. There are a couple different types of trigger. There's a facilitator trigger, which is making it easier to act. So if you have an email or a text message that's going out to somebody, if you actually have the link to what you want them to do, then you've basically facilitated, made it easier for them to do it than otherwise would be. If you tell people, hey, show up at Capital Factory at such and such time, it's going to be great, that's one thing. If you actually give the address and the time and everything within the email itself, then you've facilitated their ability to do it. So it's a trigger that improves the ability to actually take action. Spark triggers, on the other hand, are ones that increase motivation at the same time as they're doing that. So that might be when somebody sends you, so a company sends you a email coupon to buy something at a restaurant. If they include a picture that makes your mouth water, then they've both triggered you and manipulated your motivation at the same time. I'm going to skip that. I'm going to skip that. I'm going to skip that. Actually, no, I will cover this quickly. Triggers can lose their power if they're abused. So we're all very familiar with getting notifications, getting emails, getting calls, or getting nagged from a person where the trigger is coming again and again and again and again, and I'm not doing anything about it. If you're the one delivering that trigger, the moment you notice that it's not getting the action it needs, you need to stop, because that trigger is being abused, it's broken, and you're in fact creating more dislike for your product, and you're making people blind to the trigger. So you know how there's banner blindness on web pages. Basically, once people learn to ignore certain stimulus from their environment, they get very good at ignoring it. So you want to stop immediately and then go back through and say, where is my B equals MAT formula failing? And try to optimize something in there, and then test again. Ability, so this is the more rich place to go, so that's why I'm going to spend a little more time. So the easier it is to do something, the more we'll do it. That's kind of obvious, but how do you make things easier to do? So it helps to break it down into ability is about physical cost, mental cost, emotional cost, social cost, financial cost, time cost, and ramp-up cost. This is what people are considering when they're deciding whether to do something or not. So they are both imagining that cost, and then they are physically experiencing that cost when they go through the process, right? So, and those are two different things. So the perception of how difficult any of these things is one thing people are considering. And then when they start to do the chain and going through the process, they're going to start to actually do these things and find out like it might be much more physically taxing than they expected. Both of those need to be properly optimized. But think through, what are you asking people to do? So physical cost is obviously what's the effort? Are you asking people to travel all the way down to downtown Austin, or are you asking people to come to San Antonio or somewhere? What's the mental cost? This is big in software design and in emails and in organizational change. How can you simplify the message? The easiest way to do that, cut 1/3 of all the words in your message and then cut it in thirds again, and then test it a couple times with real people where they can have a mark where they're confused. We're all writing way too much text. So, but make it really clear what you're asking people to do, what the steps are. Keep the mental, don't make them do mental math, don't make them negotiate complex graphs, keep it simple. Emotional cost is if you are asking people to do something that's kind of triggering, that's kind of, that you want to watch a movie that's really graphic or something like that. Like, is there a way that you can reduce this emotional cost and not make it so tough on them? Social cost is, are you asking them to do something that's embarrassing, basically, where they're going to take points from their relationships with other people, or like network marketing, for example, is asking you to abuse your relationships in some cases to get sales. So you're paying in social capital to be able to do this action. Financial cost is obvious, time cost is obvious. Ramp-up cost is how new is this? If this is something that's very, feels very kind of unusual and weird to do, that itself is a cost. So going through these and systematically trying to figure out which are the ones that are most costly to my users, and what can I do to bring those costs down. Now, too often designers overestimate users' ability because we have this, one of the cognitive biases that's common for us is the curse of knowledge, which is that once you know something, it's really hard to imagine somebody not knowing that. So we very often, and all product, this is sort of like, I feel like the death of good product teams is when they start to belittle the user and say, oh, they're so dumb, they're like monkeys, they're like, how could they not know how to do this? And a lot of that comes from the curse of knowledge, that it's really hard for us to imagine and have compassion for people not knowing all the stuff that we've spent months and months, if not years, studying. Yeah.
Recursive knowledge?
The curse of knowledge.
The curse
of knowledge, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one of the classic cognitive biases. So we often overestimate people's ability. We think, oh, tell them to do it, and they'll be able to do it. But we have to, again, step back, step into their shoes, have compassion, and ask them, test it. Ability can be improved in two ways. One of them, again, this is the one that we usually go to as a default, and it's the most dysfunctional way to do it, is training. The other way is simplification, like we talked about. So training is kind of using kind of math terms that is the naive solution. So when we naturally go to when our product doesn't work very well, suddenly we want to write a 6-page manual on how to use it, right? Your product should not need, probably, I would argue your product shouldn't have any manual at all. It should be self-evident if it's well designed. That's not so easy to do, obviously, but we tend to quickly go to putting more and more text to try to cover up where our product is weak. It's the hard way, because even if you do have a great manual, you're still asking people to, in isolation, imagine the future, imagine using your product, and then step over here and use your product. Much better to have it be simple, clear, explained within the product itself.
If you're building a video game, you can build a tutorial. If you're running a retail store, you can't have a shopping tutorial. You should have to make it simpler.
Yes and no. It's in video games, so the gamification will be the next talk, and a video game tutorial that is not in the ideal. A video game tutorial is in situation, so you're actually not. It's not so much a tutorial as you're playing with explicit instructions as you go.
Trying to make it more like a first level,
exactly,
rather than like a how-to guide.
The first level that tells you exactly what to do right when you do it, and there's a whole field that you can get a degree in called experience design that does that for physical environments as well. So stores are often laid out that way. So when you see really good ones, they will actually have that kind of signage, and it will be hopefully funny and clear. And so there's like you walk in and they're basically giving you a tutorial to the store without having to.
You're also kind of creating an additional cost for the user, right? Your whole idea here is to improve the ability by teaching them how to do it, but you went through all the different types of costs associated with ability, and one of those costs is the time it's going to take me to sit down and get through your training, your documentation, and figure out what you built.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a time cost. It's a mental cost. It's just painful. So simplification is the best and most efficient way to go about that. Now, ability. BJ says ability is largely the function of a user's most scarce resource at that moment. So yes, there's these different areas of ability. To prioritize where you look first, think about what your user base is most scarce on. So are you dealing with an underprivileged population? Maybe you need to look at reducing costs. Are you looking at the elderly? Maybe you need to look at physical difficulty. Maybe you're not designing well enough to the fact that it's hard to bend to the floor and pick things up.
With mental illness, maybe look at simplicity or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely keeping it simple. Motivation is, so I do want to break this down real quick. It's a drive to pursue pleasure and avoid pain. So it's basically your system is looking for opportunities to continue itself or protect itself from being, it's looking for opportunities to persist and to avoid threats to its existence, as well as your whole family line and society in general. But there are 4 types. So there's pleasure and pain in the current moment. So that's in the basal ganglia's response to that. Then there's future pleasure and pain. So this is using the same systems, but it's using your imagination to say, well, what if I fight with a bear, or what if I, go crazy in an ice cream store? Your limbic system is responding to that same stack. So that's the future imagining. Then there's social pain and pleasure. So that actually also stacks on the same things that, so when we have social rejection or acceptance, the similar systems to us feeling physical pain are activated. fMRI research has indicated. So social, again, is one of those things we like to keep putting a big red line under. It's way more important than we had at first thought designing the social. So people will consider the current pain and pleasure, the potential future pain and pleasure, social pain and pleasure of an opportunity. And then you get to, as you're talking about the complexity of motivation, then you get to also the cognitive analysis, which is much more, how, if I put money here, if I do this, if I exercise, there's not much emotional level to it. It's much more about thinking through things through coolly, and that often is at odds with what the emotional side is deciding. So those are the 4 kinds of motivation, and I think we will call it that. But you can, again, design to this by breaking it down this way. Lots more to talk about. Let's call that an evening. We'll open it to questions, then we'll have some lightning rounds. Closing thoughts? Opening thoughts? Confusions? Criticism? Comments?
I kind of want to tie this in, and I don't know exactly how, but there's a book by Gavin Kahn, Thinking Fast and Slow.
Mm-hmm.
There's a study that's done where people submerge their head in clean water.
Yeah.
So the second group, it's a lot more pain, but it ends less painful, more pleasurable to the end.
That's right.
They all prefer the longer pain, but the better end results. So how does that equate to getting people to maybe do something they don't want to do? You make it a nice ending, it's more miserable.
Yeah. So Stephen Wendell has a model called the Create Action Model. And so if I was going to send you to one book right now, it would be his Designing for Behavior Change. So he's a behavior designer out of Hello Wallet. And that's the only book that's on specifically, and it's pretty current, so it's good. His behavior change model is a little bit longer. So Create Action, it breaks out the fact that the motivation phase of deciding to do something actually goes through instant reactions all the way up to a cognitive analysis, potentially not even all that far. So it breaks out the subtleties around that in more detail. Normally I would cover that, there's just not enough time to do that in an hour. Yeah?
Go back one slide over, just have the questions. I was trying to jot down the different types of, pleasure plane at the different motivation levels you have, or the different, the future state, the current state. Just like one slide back.
Yeah, for some reason I lost control over my ability to. There we go. This one? Yeah. There you go. Anything else?
Yeah, something else I missed, which was you said there were 2 ways to increase the ability. One was training, and the other one I did not catch.
Simplification. So that is reducing and making any of these easier. So what that brings me to, though, is I don't expect you to memorize all this off the slides. So feel free to, gosh, there's so much more good stuff. Habits. These may have to be other sessions, but I don't want to be the only one who lectures here. So I could do another session on habits, another one on willpower, both of which have tons of really, really cool research on. But I actually want to put a call out for other people who would like to speak about what you're doing and engage the crowd. And so for definitely reach out to me if you would like to speak in another future session. And also, if you want to hear more from me in one of these categories, let me know that too. And if you'd like to sponsor one of these meetups, it's a great place to be in front of people who are, of like minds. If you want, so to get to your question about you missed some details that you wanted to write down, email me at info@liveneuronlabs.com, and I'm sending out white papers on each of these topics. So we'll send you to the books and web pages and videos and things that will help you get on top of them. Because my goal and the goal of everyone in the lab is not for us to remain experts, but to really get a large community of people discussing the stuff and moving the field forward and really making use of it to improve people's lives. What else?
It was a mouthful.
Has anyone tried to validate the model? Like is Dr. Fogg's model?
Yeah, it's based on some validation already. There's obviously been a lot of years of research on it, and our focus is he is really moved towards. Let me do it this way. Quick. There we go. So there are different types of behaviors actually break down into this grid of different kinds of, whether you're doing them for a short time or a long time. This is available online, it'll be in the white paper. But this kind of behavior here is kind of the holy grail for humans. It's something that you are doing, you already know how to do, but you want to keep doing it for the rest of your life. So these are all these good habits like expressing gratitude, saving money, exercising, eating better, et cetera, et cetera. So habits, there's a whole section on habits. And so Dr. Fogg is focused on tiny habits. And he has done this kind of high-speed Crummy Trial test for the past few years. Any of you can actually give it a try because it's still ongoing at tinyhabits.org, I believe. And so he's got like, it's like 10,000 different data points now on people going through that particular piece of using Beagle's MAT, but focused specifically on daily activities, which is the area that we think that has the biggest impact. It's the area we all have struggled the most, and then it has the biggest impact on changing our lives too. So in that sense, that piece has a particularly large data set, but we're also working on getting data in other areas as well.
In looking at behavioral change, to kind of, as you said, lead people towards doing what they want to do, but they find not succeeding at it yet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the end, you want to form habits, right? That's
the
ultimate goal, right?
Yeah.
So,
mostly that's.
Any thoughts on how long would it take? How much? I mean,
yeah.
When I would deal with organizational change management, the preaching is always, start early, be consistent in your message, and continue after whatever the immediate goal is met, so that you form the habits.
Right.
Any thoughts there?
Well, there's a lot I can talk about habits. You're definitely habits are all about taking something that someone's cognitively thinking about and is very expensive and moving it down to the basal ganglia to be handling automatically without conscious thought. That's mechanically what's happening. How long that takes, you'll get lots of people throwing numbers around, and the reality is that there's no certain number, and there's nothing that means it will last forever. The reason being that there's just too great of a variety of the kinds of triggers, of the how complex the environment the person's in, how variable it is. Like just imagine trying to get somebody to exercise daily who lives and works at home 7 days a week, versus somebody who is at home 2 days a week and at the office 5 days a week, versus somebody who's constantly moving from city to city and time zone to time zone. So you can see right there that even if everything's consistent, so much of their life is inconsistent. So that how long it's going to take to fix that habit. The other thing is that a habit that it's essentially a ratio of whenever there's a signal and how consistent that signal is, which is itself variable, like you want that as consistent as possible, and then every time it happens, you get this desired result and the desired reward. Every time there's that signal and you don't get the desired action and reward, it's working against the habit forming. And so some kinds of habits are many times a day. Like every time I meet somebody, do I automatically make a picture of their name and associate it to their face so I can remember faces fast? That could be something that you're practicing constantly and you get down cold in 30 days or in several days if you meet a lot of people. But if it's something you do once a day or once a week, then your chances for it, and so you can see it's highly variable. But it's a useful fiction to tell people that just stick with it 60 days and you're going to have a habit. A lot of times that helps people figure it out.
Is there any interesting data on like hijacking habits or refurbishing habits? Let's say like somebody has the habit of having a donut and a coffee every morning.
Yeah.
And instead of creating a brand new habit, you take that habit and replace the donut with a granola bar.
Yeah. Power of Habits book is exactly on that subject, particularly. It's better to hijack a habit, or when you're creating a habit in the first place, it's harder to create the habit, so make it as simple as possible, and then expand the difficulty of the action.
Okay.
So, or if you're trying to destroy a habit, you're trying to remove the trigger or the reward out of the picture and find another way to get the reward. But yes, hijacking habits is
much quicker.
Is definitely the way to go.
You said there was a book. Did you just reference the book that it's about?
Yeah, Power of Habit.
Power of Habit?
Yeah.
That's a really good book. It's really
Was
good.
it Duhigg? Yeah, that's a really good book.
Did you guys use certain assessments and with that to determine ability, to determine motivation, and would that be in your white paper?
We didn't know it would be in my own type of paper. Somebody did somewhere. This is being tackled from a lot of different areas. We focus mostly on taking like more complex psych research and trying to drive it into actionable processes people can use. So the behavior lab is focused on whether the behavior happens. So the assessment is just did it happen or not, right? So it's less complex than some of the more complex things you might be trying to assess, like how much motivation you up or down, for example. Yeah. Anything else?
Fascinating stuff.
Thanks.
Maybe in regard to changing habits, if you're looking at what the end goal is, if it's exercise, isn't it helpful to pick the easiest thing to change that will have the most impact? Like what you're eating in the morning, choose something that's you're already eating anyway, so just eat something better. Like figuring out what the goal is and then
Yeah, I think I'm hearing it to talk specifically on habits and willpower. Is that? Let's do this. Everybody pop out your phones right now and email me at this. Go here. Email me right now and let me know if you want the white papers, first off. 2, would you like to see a session on habits? Would you like to see a session on willpower? And would you like to see a session on gamification? Those are the 3 other big categories I do. We could do emotion design as well.
What was the third one?
Gamification. And by gamification, I mean gamification that works, not crap gamification. So just let me know that. We'll consider that a vote. And while you're at it, if you would like to speak at one of these in the future, please let me know. And if you'd like to sponsor, if your organization would like to sponsor, we will. You'll get a lot of social media presence as well as being, announced in front of the group and be able to explain what it is you do. And it's not really that much. It doesn't really cost that much. So the 3 categories again. Yeah.
I was curious, somewhat unrelated, what has been your personal experience with neuro-linguistic programming and how the concepts, but specifically like information gathering and behavioral design
Right.
apply to.
So so I studied it pretty in depth back in the day. It's not an academically rigorous category, but they pulled ideas from a lot of different sources. So, and then a lot of psychologists were interested and did go back and attempt to validate a lot of that. So probably about 60% or 70% got thrown out immediately, but certain good chunks of it are standard Psych now. So there's some good stuff in there. You can usually Google to find out, what the research on it, or put whatever the technique is and put skeptic and see whether it comes up. Okay, so just to be clear, at that email address, would you like to see, do you want the white paper? 2, would you like a session on habits? 3, would you like a session on willpower? 4, would you like a session on gamification? And 5, would you like to speak? And speaking doesn't have to be everything that I just did. It's much more common at meetups to have like maybe 2 or 3 companies that are doing something around behavior change or psych and tech, or even if you're working on your own group and you just want to kind of pose what you're doing and ask for an input and have a casual discussion about it. It can be that kind of informal. And then I also just to reiterate, I intend to have if we do these once a month, then I would like to, I just like to be able to just talk about this stuff. That's fun for me. And so rather than be up here talking to all of you, so we'll probably have happy hours like every other week then, so that there's time to just get together and drink beer and talk about stuff and have fun. Yeah.
You said that like predictability enhances habitual behavior. The hooked model says something different, which is unpredictability.
Yeah.
Creates mystery and therefore.
Yeah. So Neer's probably going to speak here sometime. I was just speaking to him earlier today. He's a good friend. I didn't say that predictability automatically. So it's predictability. Look at it this way. It's complex. You are correct, and it's more complex than what I said, because you do persist at trying something more often if there's uncertainty as to whether it will succeed or not. But your brain sensing whether a habit is worth investing in or not, it's looking for the frequency of actually getting a reward for it. So it's better to have a reward but have it be highly variable. And if sometimes you don't get it, that will teach your brain to persist through times when a reward isn't delivered.
On your chart where you had the threshold that you have to cross, right? I know that's an abstract diagram. There's a certain concreteness to parts of it, right? You say you can't get to the extremes.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to quantify that line in any way?
That would be getting to, I'm sorry, what's your name? Sorry, what's your name?
Annabelle.
Annabelle?
Yes.
So that gets to what Annabelle was asking about in terms of assessments. Like there are tools to try to get more concrete assessments around motivation and people's, how much people perceive the costs of things. So theoretically, you could get much more rigorous about where that line is at. But we make a lot of progress as designers over what we were doing before just by having that basic concept in mind. Right? So pick a number, 10 years out, 50 years out, maybe through brain analysis, maybe through big data, they'll be able to actually measure and say, hey, we're 2 points in financial ability below getting the majority of people across the threshold. But to some degree, where we are now is just do your best to try to understand where people are having trouble, test popping it up a little bit on that spectrum, and see whether you actually get a higher rate of follow through, conversion, or whatever it is, and then just keep trying different things and testing as quickly as you can. Okay, flash lightning rounds. Anybody would like to Anyone looking for a job? Anyone looking for hire people? Anyone want to just say something crazy? Anybody want to point people to another cool event? Anybody writing a book? Anybody want to just like get together with people on the side and build something cool?
Okay, well, I'll
Go
go.
ahead.
I know it's better than just asking one thing, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask for three.
Good. Do it.
So the first is, NewCo is gonna be here May 28th through the 29th. And I am actually having a sushi event, so if you ever want to learn how to make sushi, or you just like to make sushi, come by, check it out. Free event, and that's Friday, May 29th, at 3:30. The second is, I'm hosting a grilling event on June 26th to help drive funds to the capital area food bank. It's free to the public. We just ask that you bring donations to come. And if you want to compete, your business wants to compete, contact me at stretchrecipes.com and we can get you squared away on that. And the third is I am hiring. So I have a company called Stretch Recipes, and my name is Lauren Foster. So I'd love for you guys to look it up and learn a little bit more about what I'm doing. And if you're interested, especially in behavior change, it'll probably be a very, very interesting project.
Cool. You want to go through how to contact you again one more time?
StretchRecipes.com.
Spelled just like it sounds.
Yeah.
Stretch
Stretch
recipes.
your dollar, stretch your Lauren. And my email is Lauren, LAUREN, at stretchrecipes.com.
Okay, cool. Actually, any some other meetups will email out and tweet out with any lightning round stuff. So if you want to email me that same information at info, and then I'll add it to whatever anybody else contributes now, and we'll send it out to the group. Because we got like another 350 people who are members who aren't here tonight. Anyone else?
No other developers in here, but I work at Stanford across the street. We're hiring several application developers, some data analysts, stuff like that. So if you're up for an exciting career in self-storage aggregation, then that's the thing.
I can speak to the efficacy of Sparefoot. I got a storage unit through your site just a little bit ago. The interface, really great. The response time, way faster than I expected. Good design, good thanks.
Cool, nice.
And that's just at sparefoot.com/jobs.
Anyone else?
I'm on the board of this organization called lastcommodus.com, and we're actually hiring for a part-time temporary administrative person that could potentially turn into an executive director. So if you want to make some extra cash or just have some extra time, we're taking applications, so you can see actually you can just go to lastcommodus.com and submit an application. Or come see me, I can give you the.
Okay, likewise, well, email me.
It's like a 2 to 3 month job.
Okay. Yep. What are you in the back there? You got that? No? No?
Sorry, I was just.
You're faking me out? Okay. Anybody else?
Hi, my name is Caleb Smith, and I forget that, so I think, who you with? Caleb Smith.
Ah.
So who you with?
Caleb Smith.
Oh, looking for good. I've been working as a strategy consultant, speaking coach, and sales manager, but I'm really fascinated in the field of taking psychology and moving it into tech. I'd be interested in hearing what roles or things you might have available at your organization. I'm wrapping up a 3-month contract where I kind of rebuilt the brand and some of the business systems for a company. And I'm looking to move into something like product design or building some of the systems that pull out people's individual motivations at work. I can offer an exchange if you're getting ready to make any sort of presentation. I've done a good bit of public speaking coaching, anything from helping people lose an accent or pick up an accent to just making sure your presentation sticks. So if you want to make your business pitch, I can help you make it shorter, sexier, and stickier.
Can you do an accent right now?
I can do anything that you. Now, everyone need to speak to somebody in a foreign country and make their accent.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Good deal, excellent. Yeah.
My name's April. I'm a graphic
Caleb?
designer,
Yes.
and I'm looking for a job right now. I recently got my MFA at Texas State, and my thesis, I designed a mobile app that explored how interactive design and gamification can help enhance cognitive behavior therapy for depression. So I have it on my phone if anybody wants to take a look at it, and I have business cards. I'm looking to get more into user experience design rather than traditional visual design. So if anybody knows of any job openings, or if anybody wants to collaborate on any projects, let me know.
I definitely love to hear more about the thesis. All that stuff needs to come out into the mainstream more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, my name's Mike Larson. I'm a web designer and developer. Background in illustration, so if you have work done, it's kind of illustrative flair to it. I love doing that. My website's scribblebotcreations.com.
Likewise, email me so I can send it out.
Sure.
I'm a lead UX designer at IBM, and we have a very large studio and are trying to build up our staff. So we're hiring visual, UX, front-end dev, the whole litany of skills and experience.
Excellent.
IBM, they're near the domain.
They're kind of a big thing.
They actually now have, we've crossed the threshold, we have the world's largest design org, which is huge.
I heard, yeah. Pretty wild. Yeah, I was talking to some of you over there about some consulting, so we probably end up working together for a while somewhere. Who else? I feel like we're becoming a big family, be able to like do cool stuff together going forward. Yes.
All right. Yeah, like I said, but speak up. My name's Paul. I'm currently looking for work right now, kind of making a transition job-wise. I've been kind of full stack software engineer for a while, but I'm looking to get into something that's a little bit user experience oriented. So
Cool.
that's about it.
I'm really liking the diversity of talent in the room. There's, as I keep trying to make clear, there's a lot of research and discovery to be done on this stuff, and a lot of it comes down to being able to just build things and test them really fast. So I can really see us doing, setting up kind of I've talked with UT about potentially doing a proper lab there, or doing it through Stanford, or just us as a group, like building fast, lean, testing it, getting it, and figuring out how can we, like how quickly can we figure out design patterns that lots of people can benefit from. So that would be something that would be really cool to do as a group, since it seems like we have the diversity of skills here, which I wasn't sure we would necessarily have. Anybody else? Ashley, how are we doing on time? It's time, huh?
It's a little past 9.
Okay, guys. Big round of applause for Ashley. She takes a good